Hi, my name's Alyssa. I'm with Stories and Spoilers, the podcast. I am your host. I am so excited to talk about this book because honestly, it did have dark themes. It was pretty spooky. But for readers out there who are a little bit spooked by spooky stuff, don't worry because I will give trigger warnings. I will give a non-spoiler review in the first 5 minutes, and then I'll hop into all the spoilers further into the episode. But the first 5 minutes are non-spoiler. I'll be going through the book tropes, my favorite quotes, my celebrity casting for who I would like to see in this book if it became a movie is on Instagram already. So I hope you check that out so you can listen to this episode and also kind of refer to the pictures I put on Instagram so you get an image of who is who and who I imagine them as in the reading. This is the Taking of Jake Livingston. This is a full book talk. So that means that I go into the non-spoiler and then I go into the spoiler and I give you a pretty good heads up. Also, I hope you're doing well today. Just a little check-in. I know you can't respond to me, but put in the comments how you're feeling today, how you feel about this episode. Very cozy. Have a little candle lit, lavender smells. If you are going to work or school, I hope that your day is kind of winding down in a really chill way. So get a cozy drink, sit down, get comfy, fold your laundry, go for a jog, just chill out, and let's do this episode. So, The Taking of Jake Livingston is by Ryan Douglas. This is my first book by Ryan Douglas, and I'm loving it. I know that this could be seen as a young adult book, but I feel like it touched on a lot of adult themes. I feel like it definitely was not afraid to go into a darker aspect as well. So, for folks out there who like YA but are like, where is the spookiness? This book definitely gives the spooky. It also has magical elements, which I really liked. It's making me really want to read Blood at the Root because that's a book I want to read this year. I need to work through my physical TBR first before I get more books, but it is on my audiobook list. I already own it as an audiobook, so might just grab it there, or I might go for Libby. Your girl will always find a loophole. So for The Taking of Jake Livingston by Ryan Douglas, the physical book is about 256 pages. The audiobook was around 7 hours and 30 minutes. I have all my notes right down here, so that's why I like to look down, that's why. And then the book tropes is that this is a young adult, it's suspenseful. It's got paranormal elements. It's got dark themes. It was an amazing audiobook. So this book does follow a human main character who has magical skills, and then it also follows a darker character who has committed a serious crime and is now a ghost or an entity. So it's two different boys, two different voices, and two different stories, and they interlock in a lot of ways. So it was actually two different voice actors, which I loved because one was Jake, one was Sawyer. I could tell who was who. And I really appreciated that because Sawyer's tone and his diction and his accent in the book, he's got a really deep Southern accent, was necessary. I needed to know who was who, especially as certain elements of the story kind of unwind and the line of identity becomes blurred. I needed to kind of be able to differentiate who was talking to me. Even with an audiobook, sometimes you're hands free, you're not looking at the screen, you're not holding the book in your hands. When the POV shifts, I needed to know who I was listening to, and I definitely felt that way. So, cheers to the audiobook voices. Those actors were wonderful. I actually wrote down their names. Kevin R. Free and Michael Crouch, you guys did amazing as Jake and Sawyer. Your voices were wonderful. Okay, and I really loved this book because I felt like it touched on magic. It touched on coming out and a sense of anxiety about that, growing up, especially growing up Black in a majority space. There's a lot of white students, bullying as well. I felt like this kind of had a similar vibe as The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson, because the way that bullying was approached from the point of view of someone who's been going through it for a very long time and it's kind of coming to their wits' end, I felt that tension. I felt that frustration and his sense of isolation. And I just wanted to give him a hug. I wanted to tell him he was not alone, that it would pass. And I felt that for Maddie too in The Weight of Blood. So if you like The Taking of Jake Livingston, I would also recommend The Weight of Blood if you're not afraid of a young adult with dark themes. Um, yes, both Maddie and Jake unalive people and have powers and get bullied and start off really quiet and then become outspoken. So if you like that, I recommend those books 100%. I also did a full talk about The Weight of Blood last year. So you can definitely check that out if you want to hear about that Carrie retelling that also has elements and deep discussions on race. So that was very good. And also it's like fantasy and darkness and female rage, which we love. Um, yes. So I also want to hop into some of my favorite quotes from this book. I don't really feel like this is spoiler territory because you don't have context, but just to give you like a taste for the writing and for the energy, here are some quotes that I really, really loved. They can't hurt you because they can't touch you. It's getting too hard. It's getting too cold too fast. A shadow comes down like a blanket of ice. There are moments when it controls me, the shadows, the darkness. I become a floater. How many of our friends do we have to lose before we see enough to say enough is enough? There are demons out there who just want to see the world burn. I have never been on the same page as anyone. Sometimes I can't tell the ghosts from my mind and the real thing. I'm not all the way there. I'm not fully awake. When our hands touch, green lights spiral up our arms like breath of ivy, and pink flowers sprout like dresses on our arms. In all the years as a medium, I can honestly say I have never seen a garden grow between me and another person. There is a small romantic plot in this book. I was surprised by it and I really enjoyed it because it was natural, it was giving first love, it was so sweet. And I just like felt so much for Jake. I wanted him to get that happy ending. I wanted him to be able to explore love and also friendship. We see like the platonic love between friends, which is really beautiful later on. So that was nice. Um, I do want to mention another trope that I loved in this book, but I'll mention that in the spoiler part because I don't want to spoil that just yet. So listen if you want to hear spoilers. Okay, on to a few of my other favorite quotes. First things first, you control you. Your body is your body. Something like what you are describing wants to colonize your body. It takes knowing your reality is not for debate. It takes self-esteem. Ooh, I love that character who said that. I don't remember becoming worthy of something so nice. She is willing to be pushed out of a room she was never welcome in. I am tired of accepting I have no power. When do I get to retaliate against things that make me feel angry or dehumanized? When do I get to say when's when? Heard. Now, hopping into some other elements I want to discuss before we go into the spoiler segment. This goes for people who want to read the book. This goes for folks who don't want to read the book but want to hear all about the spoilers. You can stick around. Either way, I feel like we should always kind of have a heads up about triggers and trigger warnings. Um, I'm going to use certain words like pew pew, in reference to something this character does. There's a dark character who does something really bad, and instead of saying the name of what he does, I'm going to say pew pew. Okay, I'm going to say that. So there's homophobia, bullying, unaliving, school pew pew. There's a trigger warning for discussion of SA. There's mentions of domestic violence quite a lot and violence between a parent and a child, and a parent and a partner, like a wife and husband. And there's also discussion of family violence and family conflict, as well as parental abandonment. I did want to mention that just because it happened to two characters with their fathers, and I could see how that could be triggering for some folks. So I just wanted to mention that. Um, like I said, it's going to be a heavier episode. So if this is not for you, I totally get it. And you can move on to one of my lighter episodes. I have some very bubbly romances out there as well. So if you want to hear that, go right ahead. But last thing before you leave, I do want to give a little bit of description of what the Taking of Jake Livingston's about. So it is about Jake, who is a medium. He's able to see auras, he's able to see ghosts, he's able to see the reenactments of their death loops. And he's just kind of he's kind of like used to it now. He's been able to do it since he was 15. Now we meet him in the story when he's 17, and he has this like I guess medium-esque teacher who I imagined is Angela Bassett, who kind of walks him through what these things are so he can navigate it a little bit. So he's not just doing it on his own. When we find him in the story, he is pretty established in his power. And long story short, his next door neighbor is unalived by someone we don't know who. And it turns out a ghost named Sawyer, who was a school pew pew, he ended up coming back, I guess. Like his ghost was so vengeful, it stuck around, and he wants to possess someone, and he wants to possess Jake. And we get the point of view of Sawyer in the past through diary entries, and we kind of see how he became the way he was. By no means is the author writing or describing Sawyer in a way that makes you like heavily sympathize for him. He's deeply unlikable, but he also is someone you can see is struggling with having been bullied himself. He's struggling with a lot of really dark things himself. He may have some elements, I'm not a doctor, but I feel like he had a lot of elements of like sociopathy a little bit, like his detachment and his emotional, like just not giving an F about a lot of people and not having any like he didn't have empathy. He didn't care deeply, it was very chilling to listen to. But you get Sawyer's point of view from his diary entries, and you get Jake's point of view in real time. There is some elements of this book that gave very much like Final Destination vibes, very spooky, very claustrophobic. Um, there's also like dream walking, there's first love, there's friendship. And also Sawyer goes to a private school as one of the few black boys who goes there, and he gets heavily bullied, and you see him kind of step into his power and figure out who he wants to be. And he kind of has to face his demons both metaphorically and real life. So even though this book is dark, there are so many moments of light, and there are so many moments of Sawyer almost being like a story of someone who's gotten pushed so far and never got any love and support. This is what this person ended up choosing to do. And you end up seeing Jake's story where he's also pushed to a pretty dark point, but he's able to be saved, but not only by himself, but also by possibly other entities. And I'll leave it at that. I rated this book 5 stars. It was amazing. What a way to start 2025. I know that this book does discuss heavy stuff and dark stuff, but I'm learning as I read more that we can't just avoid the dark things. Sometimes we do have to read books that, if you have the mental space, that discuss some really heavy topics like bullying, like the school situation, what happened, and being able to understand from characters who may not look like you, marginalized communities as well, what they go through in everyday life and the demons they have to face in themselves and out in the real world, as well as sometimes in spooky stories, you know? The metaphors were thick, the symbolism was wonderful, and I loved it. I absolutely loved this book. I highly recommend it as an audiobook, but you could totally read it as a physical book too. I'm sure that it's good either way. But I loved the audiobook. And that is the end of my non-spoiler talk about The Taking of Jake Livingston. For those who want to hear the spoilers and who want to hear my favorite scenes in the book, a full explanation of the story, some metaphors that I was kind of catching on to, stick around. I'll go through those, and I'll try to kind of have this episode in a timely manner so you can really enjoy it and also kind of see what you receive from this episode. I also do want to give a shout out to one of my favorite podcasts that I've recently found between last year and this year. It's still really new to me. I want to give a shout out to Fully Booked and Caffeinated because they are one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. They inspired me to read The Weight of Blood. I really appreciate how they discuss heavy topics with a lot of respect, and they're able to dive into discussions about violence against women. They're able to dive into discussions about bullying, about discrimination with so much respect and compassion, and for the victims, as well as just having love for books and just their enthusiasm for life in general and their love of coffee. Everything they do is magic. I will link them in the show notes below. They're wonderful. Love you guys. If you hear this, you guys are just amazing. I had to shout you out because I love everything they do. And I think I want to do that moving into the future. I want to discuss more bloggers and podcasters who I really respect and who really inspire me every day and who I listen to in real time. So, yes, Fully Booked and Caffeinated. I love you guys. And I just wanted to shout you out because you're absolutely amazing. So, yeah, I will shut them out. I'll put their Instagram below as well as their Spotify because I love their Spotify. So yeah. All right. So we're gonna hop into some of the spoilers. Okay. So we do find out pretty quickly, from the previous description that Jake's powers, he's not aware of the full scope of his powers. He's still learning about them quite a bit. We know that he can see them. We know that he thinks that they can't touch him. And we know that when he sleeps, he's able to kind of, I don't know the word, he's able to project himself and like see over his neighborhood. He's able to travel in his sleep and get out of his body. He's able to astral project. He's able to do that. So I really liked how in the story they're able to discuss how Jake, he has an older brother named Benji. Benji is like an athlete. He is more established, and Benji knows that Jake can see ghosts. He knew pretty early on as well, but he doesn't really believe him. He doesn't. He's aware he has it. He just doesn't really believe him. He doesn't really give him the time of day. Benji's very important because I felt like throughout the story, Benji witnessed Jake struggling a lot with bullying, with isolation, with their dad being gone, and also navigating his sexuality. Jake is gay, and he's trying to navigate being black, gay, in a small town set in Atlanta, Georgia, in like a super small town in like the corner of that. And then also how to take up space and speak up for himself. He doesn't want to cause any problems in school and life, and he tends to just kind of pull away from a lot of people. So I felt for Jake in so many moments in this book, not only because I'm also black and gay, but because Jake's Jake's ability to speak up for himself and to voice when he was uncomfortable and to voice when something needed to stop. I'm still navigating that. So this book, in a lot of moments where it hit me, was seeing Jake step into his own and really claim his voice and claim his power both inside and outside. So I will admit, yeah, I felt very deeply for Jake. And he's in 11th grade in this book, and you kind of see the first moment you see Benji, he's being pulled into the I guess like the headmaster's office for not dressing a certain way, not abiding by their rules, and Jake is just feeling so lonely and so isolated. And it did give me the same vibe as The Weight of Blood, because both books start out at school in a setting where they're uncomfortable and they just want to disappear. So similar to The Weight of Blood in that way. Next thing is that the Jake's next door neighbor was unalived. He was a survivor of the school pew pew, and he ended up being unalived in like his bathroom in like a horrible way. And Jake sees in a vision that a knife and like an invisible hand like stabbed this guy. And we see in a flashback from Sawyer's point of view, this guy had bullied him a lot, and he was really good looking. Sawyer's sexuality is a little bit more fluid. We don't really get a word for like how he identifies, and that's fine. It's not really important to the story necessarily. It only highlights that Sawyer, in a lot of ways, mirrors Jake. They're both possibly Sawyer is possibly in the queer community. Sawyer felt isolated as well. Sawyer's dad also left him. He went through abuse from father figures in his family. We see Sawyer have a lot of internalized anger and also judgment for others, which Jake also has. So in a lot of ways, they mirror each other, which is really scary. Sawyer is white in the book, but you do get a sense of Sawyer always feeling isolated. He's said to be, like stare at people a lot, which really freaked me out. I did imagine Tate from American Horror Story sometimes when I thought of Sawyer, but later on I realized that Sawyer's description reminded me a lot of one of the guys from Shameless. So I casted him in my head. But I do cast actors in my mind whenever I read a book if it's really good. Sawyer's point of view was always told from the point of view of him writing in a diary his therapist told him to write in. We see Sawyer living in this like kind of like a shack outside of his house. His house is very run down. He's got an older sister. He's got a mom, similar to as well with Jake. He's got his mom and his older brother. His sister ends up throwing away his bug collection, which was like his pride and joy. It was like the one thing he loved. And his sister ends up like throwing it away in the water and like laughing at him. But then later on, we discover that Sawyer tried to unalive himself and was, and is alive. And that's why he went to a mental facility to get support. He went to therapy. And we see that his mom is ashamed of him going to therapy. She's afraid of like judgment from the town. So she pulls him out. It's like all these cries for help that are just ignored. And he's just so angry and it's horrible. We flash back to Jake and we see that Jake was able to astral project and see a knife floating in midair, hurting his next door neighbor. I think his name is like Mateo or something, and he passes away. And we realize that the ghost was Sawyer, and Sawyer feeds off of the fear and the grief and the pain of his victims as well as their families. He just feeds off of grief and pain, and that's why Sawyer and so many other ghosts kind of gravitate towards Jake's house, because his house is so full of pain and sorrow. You also do discover that, and I'm going to jump around a little bit because the storyline, it all connects. You do discover that Sawyer is doing certain things in order to isolate Jake so he can possess him. Jake's brother throws a Halloween party. Jake's mom's a pilot. She's always gone. Benji throws a Halloween party, and he's known for being kind of a player. He had a girlfriend, but he cheated on her a lot. And long story short, they put cameras all over the house in order to find like security to feel safe. Someone puts a camera in Benji's room, and he has spicy time with someone, and the sexy tape ends up getting leaked. and it gets leaked from Jake's TikTok, which he never uses. So it's kind of foreshadowed that Sawyer is the one who kind of leaked it because he wanted there to be conflict in the household and for Jake to feel very beaten down and isolated so he would more easily be able to possess him, which was super messed up. And at a lot of points, Sawyer does talk to Jake and try to kind of like get in his head and be like, what are you gonna do about it? And it's very, very messed up. Sawyer as a ghost is horrible, and Sawyer as a human in the past is more you see him just the abuse building and building and building, and then you eventually see him, you know, during the school pew pew, he ends up unaliving himself, and his ghost is pulled in this like ectoplasm. I imagine it as like smoke, like just big puffs of like smoke on the ground and in the air. It pulls him in, and all the bugs he like messed with, and all the creatures that he like hunted with his family, all become part of his like monstrous form. And that's why whenever he appears to Jake, you see all these like big smoky bugs and like creatures all around him because he played with them as a human. So now they are part of him as a ghost in this horrible demonic form, which is super spooky. And then from there, Jake is constantly terrified of Sawyer. Like he sees him during the daytime. He sees him floating through the school. He sees him walking around the school, his little pew pew, because he's in some parts of him are reliving the loop, but he also is able to leave the loop whenever he wants, which is just horrific. Then you get to see another character, which is Jake's like I guess mythical teacher. I loved her so much. It really freaked me out how she was able to see exactly what Jacob was experiencing. And she was able to help him to a certain extent, but even from there, he was still pretty isolated. She tells him that his body cannot be taken in by a ghost. He has to, in some ways, invite them in, as well as the ghost will affect his view on reality, but he ultimately has control of his reality, his power. He has control as a person. Um, and Jake ends up referencing, memories of his father and how a lot of the demonic forms will like grab him under the bed, or like there'll be hands that grab him, and we end up getting a flash from the past about how Jake's father found a magazine in Jake's room. Jake used to live in a different part of the neighborhood with his mom and dad when they were there. His dad was very religious. And long story short, his dad found the magazine, which was about like it had a trans um it had a trans like woman on the front, and she was like a model, and the dad saw that, which because he's a horrible person, the dad saw that, and he ended up hurting Jake and making some racial slurs towards him, making some homophobic slurs towards Jake. And in the flashback, we see Jake run away and go to the basketball court where he once had a crush on a boy. He put a note in his pocket like, "Do you like me back?" And the boy did not like him back, which is so sad. Like the unrequited sense. We've all been there. And I just wanted to hug him so many times. Like he felt so like beaten down by life. And you do get a moment in the flashback where you see that the person who pulled Jake's dad away from Jake so Jake could run away and get to safety was actually not even Jake's mom. Jake's mom just stood there. She was shook. She was, I think, in shock, um, in that way. And in Jake's point of view, he's like, "Oh, you just stood there," and he yells at her at one point. But you discover that the person who actually pulled Jake's dad back was Benji. Benji, who's also still a teenager, in the past had pulled Jake's dad back because remember he's an athlete, so he's super strong. He pulled his dad back and told Jake to run. So to some extent, Benji was not always a bystander. He wasn't always a jerk to Jake, in a brotherly way. He did stand up for him. He did protect him at times. And it was like a small light in the story. It was a small light. Um, following with Jake seeing Sawyer all around the school and experiencing these flashbacks of his past, and just feeling terrified of Sawyer as a ghost and terrified of the bullying he's experiencing at school. Especially this guy named Chad, who's like a football player. He bullies Jake a lot. He makes a lot of like racially messed up jokes. Like he pokes at him. He throws a soccer ball at him. He's talking to his friend Fiona. People think that him and Fiona like each other. They don't. They're just friends. Um, Chad's horrible. He's a horrible person. Like he had it coming. He had it coming. And long story short, Chad at one point during class makes a comment about like slaves, about a book they're reading, and he like blames one of the characters about something bad that happens to them. They're a black character. He's a horrible person. And Jake, after going through so much like sleep deprivation, flashbacks, Sawyer haunting him, um, just seeing dead people everywhere, Sixth Sense situation, he ends up stabbing Chad in the hand with a pencil because Jake always like sketches and stuff. He stabs Chad in the hand with a pencil, and he's like, that's enough. And like he yells at him. He ends up going to detention. He tells his like the headmaster, like, what are you gonna do about it? You're gonna suspend me. This guy's literally racist. He called me a slave. Like, you're not gonna do anything to him. And the professor, the principal is like, well, his parents are gonna press charges and you make a call about the police. And in a super intense moment, Jake is like, okay, well, what are you gonna do about me? I was the one who was discriminated against. What about me? And it is foreshadowed that his principal may have a substance abuse issue, so he's not in his full right mind, which was like even worse. Like a lot of the adults weren't reliable or trustworthy. The only ones I really cared about was Jake's mom, as well as I did care about Benji later on. I did care for him. As well as like the teacher that Jake had, that like spiritual teacher. Those are the only adults you really feel like you can rely on. All the other adults were very like Stephen King-esque, where they're just kind of part of the problem or they're bystanders, which is even worse. So, this is a really hard book to read if you're looking for like one of the adults to say something, because you're not gonna get it. You're not gonna get it. So there's that. And then moving from there, we see a flashback of Sawyer, and unfortunately, one of Sawyer's uncles tries to do something very bad to him, super bad. And then Sawyer's like, it's the last straw. He goes to his room. He's like, yeah, I'll go to my room. They goes to his room. He grabs his pew pew and he pew pews his uncle in the knee. And his mom comes to the house and is like, the uncle's like, oh, he hurt me. And the mom taught Sawyer how to pew pew to protect their house. Like it was their right to protect their house. She didn't, I don't think she knew how unstable he was, and she still showed him about the pew pew. So he had a pew pew in his closet. He takes the pew pew out. He shoots his uncle in the knee, and his mom has her pew pew out. She's like, "Sawyer, put the pew pew down." And he's like, "No, this guy was gonna, essay me." And the mom didn't believe him, and she ends up pew-pewing Sawyer in his arm. So that's why Sawyer, as a ghost, we see him like he has like blood on his arm and like on his head, because he was pew-pewed by his mom, and then later on we know how he unlives. So long story short, Sawyer takes his mom's car, he leaves, he runs, he realizes she was not going to believe him, and then he doesn't want to be in pain for so long. He wanted to get revenge on other people who he felt bullied him and were mean to him, which leads him to go to the school, and then we know what happens from there. And he had 8 victims, and it was horrible. And this all happened the previous November, so this was actually not even that far in the past in the book. So Sawyer's ghost is still pretty fresh, and his horrible things are still pretty horrible. We also find out that Sawyer had another friend who was homophobic and like asked him, "Are you gay?" And Sawyer didn't have an answer, and like it was just super traumatic. He ends up unaliving that friend as well, and like sucking his soul into his body. So all the souls of all the spirits that Sawyer has hurt are inside of him in his ghostly horrific form. Um, Jake ends up going into the school one day, and he sees a girl ghost, and she doesn't have any hands because she was part of the pew pew situation, but Sawyer hasn't gotten her spirit yet. He hasn't gotten her power yet. And Jake is able to see her and talk to her. And one thing leads to another, and he's able to tell her, like, you have power in yourself. Like, you can free yourself. You can ascend to the next level. And she's like, what? Like, I'm so scared to go outside. And like, you leave this traumatic death loop. And Jake's like, you can do it. Like, I'll be right beside you. She ends up able to, she's able to fight back and leave. She's able to, like, use her strength and her power to beat up Sawyer at one point, like in their little battle. And she's able to have like diamond hands and like heal that part of herself. And she tells Jake that she's only ever wanted to call her mom and like tell her mom how much she loves her. And Jake's like, maybe I can find a way to help, like we can figure it out. And long story short, that character, she pops up later in a really cool way. And I just feel like she gave a voice to a lot of the victims. She was able to in some way reclaim her power, reach out to her mom, and it touches on that element of like, can people feel ghosts? Can they feel their loved one's spirit when they're there? And yes, in a way, her mom was able to feel her spirit, and her mom was able to like, go into her room, and there was a diary, and Jake ends up writing a letter from the girl, like from her spirit. He writes a letter, puts it in, like he goes into the girl's house, puts the note in the mom in like the diary so the mom can find it. And the girl ends up telling Jake when he's asleep, like she can see him in his dreams, and she's like, "Yeah, we can meet in this middle place, like in this field in your dreams, in this situation." But yeah, long story short, she plays a major part in defeating Sawyer, which is really fucking cool. And Jake, at his lowest, Jake is in a really dark place, and then he meets this guy named Alistair, who's a new boy on at school, who's another black boy. He's very like open and bubbly and warm, and it alludes that he has a crush on Jake. He later opens up that he does have a crush on Jake. His dad is in IT, so he's really good at hacking. He ends up one day going to the park with Jake and his friend Fiona, and like one of the few moments that Jake has peace, and he ends up going to the park with Jake and Fiona, and Fiona is like an ally. Like she knows that they're flirting and she's like super sweet about it, which I loved. And Alistair tells Jake like I think I have a crush on you. And they end up having like a cute like milkshake moment. And it's just there's a lot of sweet moments they have throughout the story. But for the sake of summarizing, I won't add them all up. But there's a lot of really sweet moments. And Jake doesn't respond to the crush comment because he feels like he told Alistair that he could see ghosts, and Alistair was like, yeah, that's cool. Like he's very chill, he's very relaxed. He's like, okay, that's awesome. Like, okay, cool skill. What's up? I have feelings for you. And Jake's like, what? He's shook. It's too many things going on all at once. My man's sleep deprived. He's fighting for his life, literally. So he doesn't know how to respond. And long story short, Alistair does not get a response right back. So he's a little bit like, oh, did I make you uncomfortable? Jake's like, no, I'm going through a lot right now. Cool. Put a pin in that. We'll come up to it later. So long story short, Alistair's like, hey, with Sawyer and the Pew Pew situation and defeating him, let me hack into the core system, learn more about Sawyer and how we can defeat him from the inside, like his brain. How can we make him think you're more powerful and all that? They end up going to Sawyer's house. They find his diary. So now we get to read Jake gets to read Sawyer's story, so he's caught up, which is good. Is good. And then he gets caught up. He realizes that Sawyer is very insecure about his mom. He's very insecure about his own power. He feels very isolated. He just wants to feel like he belongs. So Jake invites Sawyer to come into his body, and Sawyer does. Sawyer's ghostly form does. And before this happens, one of my favorite scenes in the book happens, which is when Jake realizes the ghosts in the mist, like the spirits in the mist, the voices he could hear, it was more like an ambivalent like voice. It was very hard to tell like whose voice is this. But we later realized that the voices are the voices of like Jake's ancestors who've always been following him. And the way that Jake can see like auras, he can see Alistair's aura, like the pinks and the greens. His aura is very like purpley. He sees auras of other people. He sees Fiona's aura. He's seeing auras everywhere. And he ends up like his great grandpa is in the mist, and his great grandpa is like Jake. Jake just remembers all these like dark moments in his life. He's on a carousel, like he's at the old park he used to go to as a kid. He's in a really dark place, and he just feels like no one could be there for him. And long story short, Jake's grandpa is like, I better not find you trying to like come to the spirit land with us. Like we don't just chill out over here. Like we're protecting you. We're protecting this family. And long story short, like Jake's grandpa is just like, you're incredibly powerful, and I'm not going to stand here and let you give up. Jake's like, I want to be with you guys. And he's like, hell no, boy, it's too soon. Like, And he's like, but you have the power. And Jake brings up with his grandpa, he's like, what if I'm gay? Like, will I be able to come with you if I'm gay? Like, will I be able to go to the spirit land? And his grandpa is like, boy, there have been queer people before you, and there will be gay people after you. Like, for you to survive and for you to find your inner power and to like live through this is the ultimate like power move. Like you have to survive, and you have to show that like people who are gay and people who go through all these things can have a future. And it's important you fight for this life. And Jake ends up doing that. And he ends up letting Sawyer in, and you see, and this is all part of the plan. He lets Sawyer in, and Sawyer's point of view is very like intense and manic and crazy. He's able to use Jake's body to get a pew pew from Jake's house, from Benji's room. And Benji's like, what? He's there too. And Jake like just walks past him, and Sawyer in Jake's body. And long story short, Sawyer's uncle, the one who tried to do the horrible thing to him, is still alive. So Sawyer goes there, unalives the uncle, and the uncle's like, why are you doing this? And Sawyer's like spirit in Jake's body is like, what's my name? Destiny's Child style, what's my name? And oh my gosh, like Sawyer's uncle is like, I don't know. And he starts bringing up all these racist ass names. He sees a black boy, and Sawyer was white, and he's like, he can't put, he doesn't know Jake, so he doesn't know who this person is. Who just broke into his house and is trying to unalive him. And Sawyer is like, my name's Sawyer, and Sawyer's uncle is like, what? And he ends up unaliving him. Jake comes to, realizes, oh my God, I just unalived someone. I'm so freaked out, and they're fighting for Jake's body. Like their spirits are coming out of his body. The fight is all over the place, magic, magic. And long story short, um, the mist tells him to put a fire, like a circle of fire. He puts a circle of fire, and then his body's in the middle of the circle. It's levitating like 5 feet into the air, Stranger Things style. It's levitating. And long story short, Jake is able to really speak towards Sawyer's spirit and be like, get out of here. Like, I banish your ass. I banish you. He banishes him. And then Sawyer's spirit, like all the victims come out of him as horrible mist, very Voldemort. Like they all come out of him as horrible. And then the girl who's able to reclaim her arms, she comes out of the mist. We saw her like ascend to the light before, but she comes out of the mist. She's got her little chain, her little chain. She puts it around Sawyer's like monstrous form and walks him into the mist. And she later tells Jake that she brought his ass to hell. So Jake is gone. Like Sawyer's gone, but Jake is alive. He's well. He ends up getting in the car that, Jake stole from his mom. It's all beat up now. And Sawyer calls Benji. He's like, please come get me. He drops his location and he wakes up in the hospital and Benji's there. And Sawyer ends up saying, or Jake ends up saying, I beat Sawyer. And Benji's like, I believe you. Oh, such a power. He believes him. Benji holds his hand. And there's a scene where, since we were like having deep, intense moments, Jake ends up telling Benji he's gay. And Benji ends up, accepting him. And he's like, boy, I knew. Like Jake's like, I'm gay. And Benji's like, yeah, like everyone knew this. Like it's very, I related to this because when I came out, my whole family was like, okay, yeah, like people who really knew me kind of already knew. So it was a very like touching moment where it was touching, but it was also like, boy, we all knew. Um, and what I really loved was Benji says, I believe you. Your life doesn't make sense to me, but it doesn't have to make sense for it to be real. In reference to the ghosts. And then what I really loved was that Benji says, yes, I know. Everybody does. I was ready to he's like, I thought you were ready to take yourself seriously. It was very sweet how Benji's like, I already knew you were gay. And Benji had always stood up for Jake when it mattered. Like with the dad, he stood up for him. He was there for him. He let Jake run away and get out safely. And that meant a lot to me. And there was a moment where Jake says to his brother, I don't want people to realize I'm gay though. Because he's scared. He's scared. And Benji's like, but you are. And it doesn't matter at the end of the day. You can't change yourself. You have no choice but to be yourself. F it. Oh, F anyone who's a problem with it. You're still a man. And I was like, you could be gay and still be whoever you want to be. You could be whoever you want to be. Slay those demons. And I was just so happy for Jake finally announcing who he was. We don't see him come out to his mom, but I hope he did, and I hope she was very loving and caring. And then after that point, the girl's name was River, by the way, the girl with the good spirit who got her arms. Yes, we end up seeing River ask Jake to send a message to her mom, and that was the message she put in her diary at her house. But I did want to say a quote from the message that River said to her mom. If you guys have tissues, you should get your tissues now because the quote is so beautiful, and it's from River to her mom, and she's one of the ghosts from the Pew Pew, and she says, "The way you fight for me inspires me to fight for myself. Death is not always an ending. Even when I die, I'll still be with you. Even when you can't see me, I'll always love you, River." And I was like, oh my God, River. And he ends up leaving a note to her mom. And it was just so beautiful. And River's like, yeah, I took Sawyer to hell. I'm like, good for you, River. Also got that message to your mom. Good for you. Jake ends up, texting Alistair and saying, like, it's been really crazy and busy. Jake did end up getting expelled from school, but he decides to go to a different school. He talks to his mom about it, and they end up having that conversation. And one night, Jake's mom like knocks on his door, and she's like, they're having a deep conversation, and she says like, I'm so sorry that I let your dad do that to you, like that intense moment, that domestic violence moment. And she's like, I was also fighting things as well with your father. Like you were not the only one who was isolated. So we now know the despair coming from the house was not all Jake's despair. It was also probably his mom's despair, his brother's despair, their grief, their pain. Their dad ended up leaving at one point. He left, but there was still a lot of pain, and the ghosts were probably attracted to that. And the mom is like, yeah, we were both fighting. We were both going through a lot, Jake and his mom. And it alludes to his Jake remembers his mom probably experiencing the domestic violence as well, which was heartbreaking. And Jake is able to hug his mom and tell him that he loves her. And she cries, and he realized she probably hasn't heard that a lot. And it was just really hard. Like I felt for Jake's mom in the end. And then what I really loved was she says, I'm sorry for not making it feel like a safe environment. And he realizes that his mom, after 20 years, was also trying to heal and find herself and just to feel loved and accepted, um, which was beautiful. And it's smooth sailing from here, which is very good feeling. Fiona, his friend from school, ends up taking him rock climbing. And he ends up, coming out to Fiona, and she's very loving and wonderful. And Fiona says if your auras were hands, they'd be holding hands. Like Jake and Alistair should be together. And it's so funny because Jake's like, I can literally see auras, It was just super cute. And she acknowledges that Chad was horrible, which is like, finally, someone else sees it. Um, and he realizes, Jake says to himself, I owe it to myself to stand up to the things that scare me. I'll get there. And he realized like he can climb faster, he can face his demons, he can do a lot. Jake ends up texting Alistair saying, there's a lot to explain. And Alistair's like, yeah, I have a lot of time. Jake's like, time in general or time for me? And Alistair's like, time for you. I was like, I love you, Alistair. I love this man. I love him. And I loved how Alistair was so like flirtatious and sweet, even after everything they went through. Jake ends up taking him to a burger date. And Jake thinks in his head, like, I'm so into him. I consider sitting across the table from him a blessing. I was like, swoon, super cute. I know the feeling. I love my partner. If you're listening, I love you. And in this moment, Jake is like, I haven't responded to your confession back. Alistair says, if you're telling me you invited me here to break my heart, I am storming out. Me and Alistair are the same person. Like, I can't handle that. Jake says, actually, I invited you here to tell you I like you back. Alistair breaks into a huge smile and he's like, of course you do. Who wouldn't? Jake says, oh Lord. I was like, this is really my relationship. Like, you have one is like extremely like cute, quirky, kind of cocky person who's like, yeah, yeah, I love you, I love me. And then you have one person who's like, I literally can't put up with you, but they adore you. We love it. I love to see it. They laugh together, they go on their first date, they walk down the street, they hold hands, and they end up kissing under the street light. And the last part of the book that really made me so happy was this line where they say, it's like everything that came before doesn't matter anymore. And Jake realized like the feeling he has with Alistair and the feeling he has with himself in this new chapter of his life is so worthy and is so full of life. And Jake says, a rush. When my body reminds my soul it's alive. That's the feeling he gets. And him and Alistair kiss, and it's beautiful. And it's just such a happy and beautiful ending. So I loved The Taking of Jake Livingston. I was so happy for the queer representation, for the LGBTQIA representation. And I hope that if you did listen to the spoiler take, that you do end up reading it for yourself because it was a great experience. And I hope that you end up supporting the author because I would read anything that this author writes from here on out. So I hope you enjoyed this episode and have a wonderful day or night. And come back to Stories and Spoilers, the podcast. You can like, subscribe, and just leave a friendly comment. Have a great day.